and welcome to the first webcast of the College Football Now. I'm Brant Parsons with Matt Murschel. This will be our weekly look at college football on OrlandoSentinel.com. You're our college football expert. I'm just the guy that kind of plays off you.
I'm just ready to get started with college football. That's what I care about.
Well, on today's webcast, we will be having our sports editor who just walked in. We'll get him mic'd up. We're going to give you a sneak peek of the football preview section that comes out in Thursday's paper. If you're a premium subscriber, you can check it out now online. Before we get to that, though, we're going to look at the state teams going into the year. We have some superlatives we're going to pick later. Start at home, UCF, a team that has won or shared a conference title the past couple seasons. Looking at them going into this year, some questions. Where do you see them heading in, and what are we looking at with the Knights?
Well, I think you look going into the season. I think you look at the fact that they've had an extended amount of success. You mentioned the last couple of years winning the American. I think you got Justin Holman. You talk about with the ability that he's shown at quarterback. William Stabbeck at running back. Again, if he stays healthy, I think this team would be good. I think some question marks for me are going to be on the receiving core. They lost so much talent. You use J.J. Wharton, Rashad Perryman, Rennell Hall. You lose some of the more talented, more dynamic wide receivers. You look on the defense, linebackers still a question mark a little bit. Secondary has some holes to be filled. This is kind of a young team in certain aspects. And then you're moving forward, I think, you look at their schedule as well. They're going to be on the road at Stanford for a late night game. And they're going to be at South Carolina. So two big kind of games against Power 5 conferences. So I look at UCF having a good year, but maybe not winning the American again.
I mean, you talk about the games at South Carolina and at Stanford, obviously big non-conference games. The American, though, is going to be tough this year. You've got Navy coming into the conference. Navy always tough to deal with the triple option. You have Gunnar Kiel in Cincinnati, one of the top passing teams out there. East Carolina has some holes. We just learned today that their quarterback is out. But there are some teams within the American that are going to give UCF trouble. And I think if you ask George Leary, the first goal, before even thinking about being the non-Power 5 representative in the Bulls, is to win the conference. That's going to be really tough this year for them.
Yeah, and let's not forget, now the American is in two divisions. They're going to have a conference championship game, so that's an additional game they're going to have to win. So it's not just a given that you have the best record in the conference and you're going to get a chance at that possible golden ticket in the college football playoff. You're going to have to win a conference championship game. That's an additional game, and a lot of coaches are kind of on the fence about that. They enjoy having them, but at other times, it's another obstacle you have to overcome to get a chance to win.
Talk about UCF rebuilding. Florida State, same kind of situation on a bigger scale. Jameis Winston gone, tons of talent, moved on to the NFL the past couple seasons there. Jimbo Fisher, as we say in our section, this will be the test to see what kind of a college football coach he is. Florida State, questions at a lot of places. Are they still the team that they've been the last couple of years, or we can expect them to be part of the national discussion?
Yeah, I still think they are. I mean, I still think they're a top 10 team. Obviously, losing a talent at quarterback like Jameis Winston, that's going to affect this team. And losing the amount of talent they have to the NFL, you look at with the defense and on the offensive line as well, that's going to all have an impact. But you bring in a guy like Everett Golson, who transferred in from Notre Dame. I think he provides them with the best opportunity to win. You look at what they have at running back. Looks like Dalvin Cook now, besides with his legal troubles aside, is now going to be back there. He was over 1,000-yard rusher last season. That helps them out as well. They have some talent at wide receiver. They also have some talent on the defensive side of the ball. I think, again, this is a top 10 team. I just don't know if this is a team that can compete for the college football playoff.
Talk about the American and how tough it's going to be. Looking at the Atlantic Coast Conference, there are some teams starting to catch up. Obviously, Clemson been on the edge of catching Florida State. You have Georgia Tech on the way up. People are optimistic about North Carolina and some other things. How much tougher is it going to be just to get out of the conference this year for Florida State?
Well, I think it's going to be tough. I think Clemson is the team to beat, even though I know they've lost some players the last couple of years, and they've lost some players this offseason. I think they're going to be the team that's going to give them the most trouble. I think Louisville's going to be there as well. I think you're also going to have some other teams, maybe Boston College, NC State, those two teams, maybe on the very fringe. But really, I think Clemson's going to be the team that's going to give them the hardest trouble. And I think if Florida State can win the ACC Atlantic, I think you look at the Coastal. The Coastal's really up to anyone right now. I think they'll win the ACC.
Go heading down I-10, a little bit down 75 to a school that has not had the success Florida State has the past few seasons. New head coach Jim McElwain coming to Gainesville. And when you look at some of the numbers of the offense that has happened at Florida the past couple seasons under Will Muschamp, I mean, you knew it was bad.
Yeah.
But when you see the numbers laid out in front of you, which you'll see in our preview section, that's a nice little thing there, but it was a bad offense at Florida, and if you hear people that were in the offense, like Jeff Driscoll saying that it wasn't even just talent, they didn't have routes, they limited routes. Yeah. Things are going to change in Florida this year. How quickly can things change under Jim McElwain with that offense?
Well, I've been preaching this the last 2 or 3 years for Florida fans, and I'm going to preach it again. Patience, because believe me, the Gators it's going to take some time for this to happen. I think Jim McElwain is a good hire. I think he's going to get this program probably back where they need to be in a couple of years. But again, it's going to take a couple of years. I mean, he's got some talent there right now, but they have lots of question marks. We're not sure who's going to be quarterback. Is it going to be Will Grier? Is it going to be Trayon Harris? They've got a solid running game. I think their offensive line is paper thin. They've got young talent there, but if some of those guys get hurt, do they have the depth to come in? And again, Florida's defense is going to be the key to this team. I think they're going to keep them in a lot of games this year, but when you look up and down Florida's schedule, it's really tough to compete. I mean, you're looking at LSU's, the South Carolinas. You're looking at Georgia, Florida State. I mean, their schedule really is going to be one of those murderers row type things, and I think that's something that's going to be difficult for them.
Since this is a preview show, what do you see as a successful year for Florida State? I mean, I don't think any of us expect them to win even the SEC East at this point, but where can they compete in that division?
I think they're probably going to be the third or fourth best team in the SEC East. I see them winning 7 games. If they can win 7 games, I think Florida that's a good season for them. Believe me, Jim McElwain, as much as he's focused on this season, his staff are focused on this season, they're also looking to the future. They're recruiting really hard. Florida's already got a top 25 recruiting class for 2016. So I think they look to the future. They know in the next couple of years they're going to have the pieces to compete.
And our final state team look, you talk about recruiting ahead, a school that is doing very well on recruiting, the Miami Hurricanes, but have not been able to translate that onto a field. Al Golden seat might be getting a little warm this year. I know Miami doesn't like to buy out contracts, so it's probably not as hot as people think it is, but Miami, it's about time some of these big name recruits and these good recruiting classes start to produce on the football field.
Yeah, I think this honestly could be Al Golden's make or break year. I mean, I look at this situation and I know the school doesn't like to buy out contracts, but listen, if you start losing the big name alumni, if you start losing the Michael Irvins, if you start losing the guys, the Warren Sapps, the guys who come to the program year in and year out and work out with the kids and get them excited, if you start losing those guys, then I think you're in trouble. As much as Al Golden is a great recruiter and one of the better in the country, if you don't have that backing from the school and from these alumni, I think it's going to be awful hard. I mean, and you look at their schedule and you look at what they got. Brad Kaya is a tremendous quarterback. I think a young up-and-coming quarterback. He'll be able to make plays. I think they have to replace Duke Johnson. I think defensively they got some question marks as well. So, but again, one of the nice things if you're a Miami fan is you look at the Coastal, it's anyone's. Like really, it's up for grabs. I think anyone can make a big push and win it.
As Miami fans probably know from our countdown, you don't think so highly of the chances of those things happening. As of right now, we don't have the Hurricanes in a bowl game this year. What needs to change for us to say, well, you know what, maybe that is a bowl-eligible team?
Well, I think they need to have some sort of consistency. If they play with a lot of consistency, I think if Brad Kaya makes those steps you need to make for being a second-year quarterback, if you can show that you can lead a team, I think those are the things that'll help Miami. And you got to stay close in games. If you're in games all the way down to the fourth quarter, the last couple drives, you have a chance to win. And if they can do that, I think they may be able to flip some of those games that I thought they might end up losing.
Now, I've teased the football preview section. This is where we're bringing in sports editor Roger Simmons. It comes out in everybody on Thursday. It's online now if you want a sneak peek, if you do have a subscription. We went with coaches, and the cover story is a great cover story. It's a guy that we interviewed him on his favorite topic. He was talking about himself, and of course, that's Jimmie Johnson. But talk about the idea to go with Jimmie Johnson, how he became our cover subject of this.
Right, so we decided to do a theme of coaches this year for many of the reasons you just talked about, according with Golden and everybody else. There are a lot of coaches. It's a very critical year for them. So we decided to focus on that. We wanted to look who would be on our cover to kind of, amplify exactly what it is we're trying to do. And we thought of Jimmie Johnson because he's a great story, just because of the fact he was the first coach to win a college football national championship and a Super Bowl. Now, a couple others have done that so far. One guy, Barry Switzer, with Johnson's team, the Cowboys, and also Pete Carroll. Now, Johnson, at the height of his career, he was getting the largest contract a coach ever had in the NFL, walked away from the NFL. He was with the Dolphins, left football completely, and hasn't looked back. We see him on Sundays on Fox, but basically he went down to the Keys, and that's where he lives. And he's become this guru that a lot of coaches go down and talk to get his opinion, not just about football, but about life. Bill Belichick, Urban Meyer, go down to talk to Johnson. And what Johnson told our Mike Bianchi is that he found that his life outside of football was lacking. He went to his mother's funeral, and it hit him all the things he had missed in his life. He had not spent enough time with his mother. He let his first marriage fall apart. His sons, he hadn't spent any time with them, and he's looking back and saying, you know, this is not the life I wanted. I've accomplished all this, but there's still areas of my personal life I need to work on. And that's what he's done. He's found that balance. But he still has a fantastic football mind, and people seek him out to get his advice on everything. So we thought he was a great guy to put on our cover to talk about, if you're going to talk about coaches, the highest of highs, the lowest of lows, he's a good person to amplify that.
You talk about iconic Florida coaches. We had a iconic Florida coaches reader interactive poll leading up into this section, and you think of some of the big names that have been in this state. You know, Steve Spurrier, Bobby Bowden, Don Shula. Who's the guy that ended up winning who our readers chose as the best football coach?
Oh, it's funny. The guy that won is David Whitley's homeroom high school teacher that was in Jacksonville. Our David Whitley actually wrote a story about it. The winner of the greatest football coach in Florida history bracket was Corky Rogers, who's a high school coach at Jacksonville Bulls. He beat Don Shula in our final round. The winningest coach in NFL history was beaten by a high school coach. Now, granted, Corky Rogers is the winner, the leader of wins in high school coaches in the state of Florida, and he's getting ready to move up to number 5 nationally. But it was so interesting that David talked to him. One, he remembered David when David called and said, hey, do you remember when I was in your class in high school? The other funny thing that David got out of him is that Corky Rogers wanted to be a pro football player, and that's what he worked toward. And he made it onto the Baltimore Colts. And he was with the Colts, trying out, things were looking good. The coach of the Colts said, you know what, I want to move you to a different position. You're just not at the right position. And I also want you to go play a year in minor league football to learn this new position. And Corky Rogers basically said, no, I really don't want to do that. I think I'm just going to go into a different career. All right. So he left pro football, became a teacher, became a high school football coach. The man who told him to switch positions, who made him leave pro football, was Don Shula, who he beat in our bracket. So payback is great.
And you talk about coaches and how big it is this year, and you may not expect Corky Rogers, but the other coaches in this state and what it was like to kind of focus them on this section. You've obviously spent a lot of time with the section, saying the different coaching dynamics in this state. Has there been a time when you can remember so many, them almost being, I mean, they are the story. They're our story.
Well, one, it's just because we have more coaches than perhaps ever before because of all the college programs that have come up, and we have 3 NFL teams and everything. But it is an unusual year where each of these coaches, it's such a significant year for all of them. I mean, McElwain at the Gators, can he have an offense? Can they, and try and get Gator Nation back going? And Jimbo Fisher, well, our cover story on him is how people are questioning whether or not he's actually a good coach. They're like, oh, you had this Jameis Winston guy. Anybody could have won with Winston. So he's done a good job, so now we're going to see what he can do without having a Heisman winner in camp. Or is he the kind of coach who helps mold these players and build them up into what they become? And at UCF, George O'Leary, who's just an interesting story in himself, that, he wants to be the guy in charge. Well, he's in charge now of everything from football and athletics department. And UCF has this added pressure of trying to get into the Big 12. That's their goal. So they need to perform well on the field this year while George O'Leary juggles these 2 duties. The NFL coaches situation is just, all of them could be fired at the end of the year, or all of them could be back at the end of the year. So it's really interesting. It's going to be fun to watch. I know we like focusing on the players, but the coaches' story is going to be a very interesting story too.
Check out the preview section. It comes out tomorrow. And I don't know if you watch Hard Knocks, maybe we need to get you a bed like J.J. Watt in the back, and you can take a nap during the weeks leading up to this. I know a lot of time and hours went into getting a section ready.
We're all a little tired, so we could take a little rest, and then we got to get back up for football season.
All right, so that comes out tomorrow. We're going to switch back to college football talk just as a singular item here. And because it comes out, that means our countdown, which started way back when, has ended. It ends tomorrow. We're gonna peek ahead at number 1. It's no secret. It's everybody's number 1. The Ohio State University came out of nowhere last year, if you will, after losing to Virginia Tech. National champs coming in this year. The first unanimous number 1 team in the AP poll ever for preseason. So, I mean, I should ask you why they're our number 1 team, but it's pretty obvious. But talk about them as being the number 1 team in our countdown.
Well, I think it was pretty obvious. I mean, like you mentioned, I think even from the beginning, after the Ohio State won, the national championship last year, I mean, I pretty much had them idea that they were going to be the top team again. I was just waiting to see what the quarterback situation would happen, what would happen with some of their players, would some of them lead to go to the NFL, and we didn't see that as much. So the quarterback situation still is up for grabs, but again, as I tell people all the time, Urban Meyer has one of the greatest luxuries ever. He has two guys who are competing for the top quarterback position who could start at any other college in the country right away without even a competition, in J.T. Barrett and Cardell Jones. So I think to have those guys there is a tremendous amount. I think his offensive line is one of the best in the Big Ten. You've got a running back, which people kind of tend to forget, Ezekiel Elliott, who put together one of the greatest stretches of a running back in the last 3 games, in the Big Ten championship, in the semifinal game against Alabama, and then the national championship win against Oregon. He rushed for almost 700 yards. He had 9 touchdowns and a 9.1 yard per carry average. You have those guys back. Then you look at the defense, which once again is stacked. You got a guy with Joey Bosa, who on that defensive line, who's going to help them out as well. And you look at their schedule a little bit, and I really think that that's the reasons that Ohio State. And then I'm also going to throw in, we talk about coaches, Urban Meyer. I think Urban Meyer's been there before. He knows what it's going to take. So all those factors together led to Ohio State being my number 1 team.
You mentioned the 2 quarterbacks. He's got a guy that's going to play receiver that could be a quarterback at almost any school out there. Before we move off Ohio State, you talked about Urban Meyer. You wrote about Urban Meyer in the preview section that comes out tomorrow. I couldn't, when we were talking before you'd even started writing, before we were trying to remember a team that was going to come into this season as heavily favored as Ohio State was, and both of us agreed it was his Florida Gator team that infamously fell apart after they lost to Alabama, and Tim Tebow cried, and Urban Meyer ended up quitting for a day. How is he looking at this season different? You talked to him at the Big Ten media days. He's the last guy to go through this, and as you wrote in your story, it almost killed him. Literally, it was so much pressure. How's he looking at this year differently?
Well, that was the thing. I caught up with Urban Meyer at the Big Ten media days, and he was asked, how is this different this time around? You've been through this in 2009 after coming off a national championship win. How is this experience differently? And Urban said, listen, I'm a different person, basically. I'm going through this a whole different way. If we go undefeated this season, I'm not going to be miserable. When they went during that win streak back when they're at Florida, he was miserable. He said it time and time again. It's well documented that he was very miserable, went through health issues, lost something like 38 pounds during the time, and as you mentioned, basically stepped away, had a couple of attacks that kind of caused of concern for his health. Urban said, this time around, I am not going to be that way. I've delegated a lot more this time around to his assistant coaches, really has kind of got the team he feels like is more prepared for this, really ready to kind of embrace this challenge. And he said, again, if we win, I'm not going to be one of the most miserable guys in the country. And I think you can see that right now. I think he's ready, focused, and he knows he's got the talent to win it again.
I mean, there are other teams in college football, but you talked about Ohio State and the quarterback situation. When we're trying to figure out the playoff, the 4 teams in the playoff, the quarterback situation at schools plays into it, be it good, as in TCU, be it as questionable, as in Alabama and Oregon. Those are our playoff teams, our top 4 teams that came out. Two with question marks at quarterback, 2 that we know of. Where do we look at Alabama and Oregon coming in because they have the question marks, but we see them getting them into the playoff?
Yeah, I think because Alabama has the history, because Nick Saban knows how to get teams there, even with having a new quarterback, I think the offense is still going to be there. I think Alabama finds a way, much like with Urban and much like with Jimbo. I think those guys find a way to recruit well, get young, talented people there, and put them in the situations to be able to win. Same thing at Oregon. I know Marcus Mariota's gone, but they've got a guy in Vernon Adams who could step up. He had some tremendous career over at Eastern Washington. He's a graduate transfer. If he finds his way into the offense and really kind of fits comfortably, I think Oregon's going to be right there as well. They have the athletes and the talent and the athleticism. I think TCU is an interesting team. This is the one team that I know the Big 12 wasn't there, got left out last year, but you look at this offense, you look at what Trayvon Boykin was able to do at quarterback. He put up video game-like numbers. I think he'll continue to do that this year. They've got solid return and running back. They got solid offensive line, and the defense is the only question mark where they're not as deep as they were last year. So the Big 12 is up for grabs. I think they'll win the Big 12 again. I think they'll compete in the college football playoff this year.
Well, since this is live, anything we say won't be remembered, right, guys? We're not like recording this or anything. What we're going to do is make some predictions. But no one will ever know we made these predictions beyond today.
Yeah.
So, but we've kind of made predictions with the top team and the top 4 teams. What I want to ask you, and I've done my list too, so we're both going to be on the hook for this. A team that going into this year that maybe people won't expect to have the season they will, a surprise team, if you will. When you look at a college football, who's the team that sticks out to you as, you know what, I think they're going to be better than people may expect?
Well, I think when you're looking at the teams and you're thinking this team could be a little bit better than expected, I don't think people have Oregon very high up. You know what I mean? And I think we talked a little bit about that. I mean, just for me personally, I think Vernon Adams is the type of player that could step in as a graduate transfer. I think he can make a big amount of difference in this team. And I think people kind of are looking past them a little bit. And I think because you lose a guy like Marcus Mariota, the Heisman Trophy winner, and I think they look at that and think, well, the Pac-12 is loaded and everything. And I get that. And I think Oregon's going to be one of those teams I think people look out for. Because to me, I don't think anyone expects them to be there. No one expects them to be right back where they were.
The team that you didn't even mention when you're talking about Florida's tough schedule, Tennessee. That is my surprise team this year. And I'll tell you what, I'm not saying they're going to win the SEC East. I'm not saying it, but I think they're going to be better than people expect because I think what Butch Jones is doing there is building the Tennessee program back up. And you look at their losses last year. Lost to Georgia by 3. Lost by 1 to UF in just an ugly, terrible game. Hope you never have to watch that. Lost to Missouri by 8. They finished the year 4-1. They beat Iowa in the bowl. And Joshua Dobbs comes in as the quarterback. He's not going to be taking over. He's got a lot of veteran receivers around him. And this defense will continue to get better. I think Tennessee going this year, their schedule's tough, but you can say that about everybody in the SEC East, but they always have to play Alabama. They'll have to play Georgia, Florida, all those games. But I think Tennessee, a team that people may be writing off because of recent play, is going to be a surprise team. At the end of the year, they're going to be in the upper echelon, top 10, top 15 teams.
Well, I think I will say I think the Tennessee is going to be much improved. I think Butch Jones has done an amazing job with recruiting. I think they've got returned something like 18 starters this season. I think they'll be there. I'm not sure necessarily if they'll be a top 10 team. I think they're a team that needs one more year. I think to kind of get a little bit more of that talent in there. But I do agree they're a team that's definitely on the rise.
Now we're going to talk about teams that are overrated, and we both picked the same one. I made you pick another one, but I'll start off with mine. So I kind of agree with. All talk about Florida State is that they're going to be challenged by Clemson, and I'm not sure that Clemson is a given. I'm not saying Clemson's going to be terrible, but I don't know that they're just penciled in to take over that spot from Florida State. This is a team that has only 3 returning starters on defense. They lost 29 lettermen last year, and they have a quarterback who's coming back from knee surgery, and he was injured twice last year in Deshaun Watson. I know Clemson looked great in a bowl game. They beat an Oklahoma team that didn't care to be there. But I'm not quite ready to say Clemson is the heir apparent to Florida State just because, just like Florida State, they have so many things to replace. And that defense is going to be very young, and it's going to start the year. They've got Louisville, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, all of those games early in the year. They have 2 cupcakes, but then they're going to get tested early, and I don't know if that defense will be ready by then. They might be ready by the time they play Florida State. They have 2 or 3 losses by then in the conference.
Yeah, I think until they beat Florida State, I think again they're a team that's kind of on the bubble for me as well. I know that Dabo Swinney, after talking with him at the ACC spring meetings, feels like this team really can compete for the college football playoff spot. I'm not necessarily sure if that's going to be the case, but I think they do have the talent. But they have to beat Florida State. They have to get past that hurdle.
Now, your pick, since I made you not make a pick of Clemson, so we both are on the hook for someone. You went to the SEC with yours.
Well, I'm going to go with Arkansas, and I know Arkansas fans hate me already about this. But listen, I think Brett Bielema's done an amazing job with this program. I think that he's got the Razorbacks back where they need to be after a couple years. I just don't buy the fact that Arkansas is a top 10 team or a top 15 team. I think their schedule is really difficult, one of the most difficult in the country. I think they have a tremendous amount of talent, but I'm concerned about their quarterback play. I think again, I don't necessarily think when you look at the SEC, they've got enough to really kind of get where they need to be. Plus, they play in one of the toughest divisions in the SEC West. You're facing Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State. You're facing a litany of teams that you're going to have to get past. So I don't buy that they're a top 25 team just yet. Now, maybe they'll flip some of those games and get that, but at this point going into the season, I think Arkansas is a little overranked.
I think in that SEC West, you're going to have a couple of teams that are come out. People are going to end up saying, oh, how do we rate them so high? When you have all those tough games, but I think you're going to see an Arkansas, and Mississippi State, and Auburn, and LSU. A couple of those teams are not going to have years you expect just because they're going to have to play each other, and they're all tough games, and we know how difficult it is to play in the SEC West. The Heisman Trophy is a yearly coveted trophy that has been given to quarterbacks a lot lately. Your pick, though, you see the trend changing this year.
Yeah, I actually think there could be a running back that could win the Heisman Trophy. There hasn't been one that's won since Mark Ingram back in 2009, but I like Ezekiel Elliott, Ohio State. I know, again, there's a lot of love for Ohio State out there, and people are kind of tired of hearing about it. But I think Elliott can really put together a tremendous season. I look at that offensive line the Buckeyes have. I think that'll help him out as well. I think he was able to take advantage of those last 3 games, like I mentioned. I think, if you can use that to kind of springboard yourself, especially the performance he had in the national championship game with 4 touchdowns, I think you can use that to springboard. Plus, I also feel like the Big Ten is a conference where you're going to get a running back who come out with maybe 2,500 yards rushing. We saw it last year, with the Wisconsin with Melvin Gordon. I think Elliott could do that as well. I think he'll have a lot of eyes on him too, because I think that'll help his drive for a Heisman Trophy campaign if they want to go that far. But don't expect any sort of campaign from the university itself, not at least until late.
Yeah, I'm going to go quarterback. I'm going to go with traditional. And it was a team that I was going to pick USC as my surprise team, but I decided to put Tennessee and move USC down because I don't know if USC can be a surprise where they're coming from. But USC, at least first team. Yeah, the depth may not be there for the Trojans. They're good as any team in the country, and Cody Kessler might be as good as any quarterback in the country. Almost 70% completion percentage last year, almost 300 yards a game, receivers galore. Just any quarterback would love to throw the guys they have out there, and an offensive line that brings back the entire offensive line. Cody Kessler, I think he's going to play on a winning team, which always helps in a Heisman race. I think USC is going to win the Pac-12. And he'll be the one that gets the credit for doing so.
Well, I think he's a guy definitely coming back. He's one of the top quarterbacks in the country. Will probably more than likely be a first-round pick in the NFL after this season. So, again, I think there's a lot of – I see what you're saying there. I know the quarterbacks have won. They pretty much dominate the Heisman race as well because of numbers. But he's got the offense to do it. But, again, I kind of like the idea of a running back winning. Come on, where's the love for the running game? Let's go.
I love the running game. And Ezekiel Elliott, one of the great stories of last year – and I'm going to talk about a running back in this situation, but we're going to pick guys. We know about your Ezekiel Elliott now. We know about your Cardell Jones. We know about your Trayvon Boyden. I want a name of a guy that people haven't heard of, a Johnny Manziel, if you will, that came on that you may not have known a lot going into the year, even Ezekiel Elliott, who you didn't know, or going into the year. A guy this year that by the end of the season, everybody that follows college football is going to be talking about him.
All right, I'm going to give you a name, and we've talked about it just a little bit. It's going to be Vernon Adams, the quarterback at Oregon. I know he hasn't been named the starter yet, and I know there's a possibility he might not start as the start of the season. But I think the guy has got the talent and the tools to really showcase himself in that Oregon system. I mean, we saw what Marcus Mariota was able to do there. I mean, again, he's got 1 year. He's a graduate transfer, so he's going to come in and he's going to kind of give them an opportunity with all the talent and all those guys around him. I think he can put up some big numbers, and as we've seen, that there's a possibility you can put up big numbers in that Oregon system and win the Heisman. So I think Vernon Adams ran a similar sort of system at Eastern Washington in the FCS. I think he's going to have that same sort of luck with Oregon. I could see him at the end of the year being one of the top quarterbacks in the country.
You say I don't give running backs any love. My pick for a guy that you're going to know by the end of the year, Corey Clement, running back for Wisconsin. Can you imagine if here's a guy that ran for 1,000 yards last year, scored 9 touchdowns. There are a lot of schools that would love to have had that from their starting running back. He sat behind. He teamed up, if you will, Melvin Gordon. Gordon's gone. We know what he did last year, but he was part of that tandem. They rushed over 3,500 yards together. He is going to be the man in Wisconsin. He is extremely talented. He's going to get a bulk of the carries, and that quarterback situation in Madison is dire also so Paul Chris is going to be leaning on Clement this year. We know what Wisconsin can do running the ball. We know the big uglies he's going to have in front of him. Corey Clement, by the end of the year, we're going to be talking about as one of the best running backs in the game. And he may already be that because he's been playing behind Gordon, but I think this is a year he's going to have just a numbers breakout running for Wisconsin.
Yeah, when you look at the Big Ten is all about running game. And I think you look at what we've seen in the past. So I think, again, he's a guy that could put big numbers as well. I think he's a guy that not a lot of people are very familiar with, especially outside the state of Wisconsin.
All right, now before we go, we've both agreed heading into the year that if we had to make a pick for the national title, it would be Ohio State. It's hard not to pick Ohio State, but that's why they play the games. And we've seen, I don't know how many AP number ones that have been this favored don't win the title. They don't go wire to wire. There is that chance Ohio State doesn't win the national title, and all this is for naught. Who is the team? If Ohio State doesn't win the national title, who would you say would be the team that's going to be the champ at the end of the year?
Well, I'm going to I was going back and forth before we got on the air about what it was going to be. And I think, honestly, even though I know they have issues at quarterback, I really think Alabama. I'm going to go with SEC. I know this sounds bad, but I'm changed my mind because I really feel like Nick Saban's one of those kind of coaches that has done a tremendous job with that team, gets the amount of talent that he has in there. I think it's not like they're going to pull some random guy out and throw him at quarterback. And I think they have a running game with Derrick Henry and some of those guys, those tremendous King and Drake there as well. I think they got some guys that can really help them out as well. They're a little sour after that loss to Ohio State, and I feel like he's getting a lot of pressure, Saban, just a little bit on this. So I'd look to see them to perform again, maybe possibly win the title again.
You were cheating off my sheet. I was going to say Alabama, but no, I'm going to go with TCU. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't pick Alabama situation because to me it comes down to the quarterback in college football. In Alabama, there's too many questions there. They can be loaded everywhere else, but until they get a quarterback in there with that schedule they have, I'm not sure yet that I can pick Alabama. But TCU is hungry. They're angry. They've got a quarterback that could win the Heisman Trophy. We know what kind of defense TCU can play. Their schedule is going to be light.
Yes.
They're going to most likely be undefeated. If they can avoid any hiccups, which every team has those games. Ohio State needed to barely beat Penn State last year. If TCU can get through the games that they should win, gets a solid effort against Baylor and wins that, I think they'll have done enough to get into the playoff. And if they get there, I think anything can happen with that offense because TCU, they can score points in bunches.
Yeah, they can. I think the one thing like we mentioned is the schedule. I think you look at what they play. Minnesota's a good team to start off with. But again, the Big 12 isn't as up as some of the other conferences as well. But they do end their season against Baylor, and I think that will help them out, get them maybe a push going into the college football playoffs. And as we found from the playoff, you don't have to be. It doesn't matter if you're 1 or 2. You could be 4 and still win the national title, as Ohio State demonstrated last year. So I don't necessarily believe that as long as you're in that playoff mix, I think anyone can get a chance at winning it.
And I think TCU will get in. I think that's. I don't think they get left out if they have.
So someone's going to. So either from someone from the ACC or the Pac-12.
The ACC is not going to get anybody in. Sorry, you can email both of us. Neither of us think the ACC is getting anyone in this year. It's just it's the top teams in the ACC. I just don't think have enough. Well, we're done. That was our preview show. It went well every week throughout the football season. We'll be here Wednesdays at 2 p.m. talking college football. We'll look back. We'll do more predictions that we'll forget about and focus on the different things as ahead until the playoffs come out, and then we'll be able to talk about which teams each week get into the playoff mix. What are you most excited before we go? The thing we're 8 days away from UCF kicking off the season at 6 p.m. on Thursday evening. What are you most excited about to see to get this season going?
I'm just excited